You're stranded in the cold, alone, exhausted, and on the brink of collapse. Maybe you're hurt. Maybe you've already gone as far as you can, and it's now undeniable. There is no happy ending to this story. You lay down, close your eyes. All there is to be done is to wait for the inevitable. And then you feel it. A presence. It is so strong. Someone is right there. Your eyes blink open when you hear it. A reassuring voice that is urging you to get up, to move forward. You can't see them, but their voice is so comforting. You obey it. You obey their commands. Now that you're not alone, a new sense of hope surges through you. You hobble, you crawl, whatever it takes. You push onward. And after some time, your hope is realized. You see lights in the distance, or hear signs of people just up ahead. Somehow, against all of the odds, you survive. You smile and turn to thank your mysterious companion, only to find no one is behind you. The presence has evaporated. Only your tracks can be seen. It seems you were saved by someone who was never there. Welcome back to the Paranormal Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. The third man factor is the name of the game today. Why are we talking about the third man during our season about ghosts and hauntings, though? Do I really think that's a ghost, a spirit, helping people in their times of need, offering comfort and words of encouragement, at times physically comforting, physically intervening? I did when I first heard about the phenomenon years ago. I didn't know this occurrence had a name at the time. It just sounded like a, helpful spirit of some sort. Maybe a guardian angel. I don't know. The first story that I ever heard was about a guy who had been in an automobile accident, and he'd been badly hurt, couldn't move. Suddenly there's this woman in his back seat. She said she was a nurse and was speaking so calmly, telling him he was going to be okay, that help was on the way, and he just had to stay awake. The ambulance arrived not too long after, and the woman disappeared from view, moved out of the way to make room for the paramedics to do their job. Once out of the car, the man looked around for his angel out of nowhere, not seeing her. Where did the woman go? What woman? They ask. The one who was here with me when you got here. No one was here but you, sir. I probably have misremembered some details about this story, but that's what I remember. Sounds entity-ish, right? I don't know. We'll see. The third man factor is the phenomenon when people in extreme or highly stressful situations report the presence of a benevolent guiding force or person, entity, whatever you want to call it. What's important is that they believe someone else is there helping them, someone who offers them comfort and direction. Many of these kinds of reports come to us from the extreme of extreme situations like accidents or deadly mishaps while mountaineering, rock climbing, diving, and, the sort. But it's not always and only from extreme sporting events and activities that we see these kinds of reports. More everyday, everyman type of third man reports have come following car accidents, bouts with severe illnesses, and even almost tragic accidents when a presence, voice, or even what appeared to be a real person intervened in what clearly would have been a tragedy before vanishing like a fart in the Antarctic breeze. So yes, I originally did think something ghostly, but the research has led me to realize it could be quite a bit more than that. The portion of the scientific community who is willing to accept the third man factor or syndrome as something that is actually taking place with folks have been led to believe it is the result of our own minds. It is some yet to be explored psychological, miracle, not a miracle, but, something we do for ourselves that we don't understand that is part of our innate survival drive, or that it's simply a hallucination. There is also something that we will consider something else when we look at potential connections in folklore. So as we go through it today, ask yourself, could this be just a trick of the mind, a psychological survival mechanism? Or is it something paranormal? Perhaps something else entirely? We will get into all of that after just a few announcements. Thursday, April 10th, I will be live with guest Dave Zilla. Initiated as an eclectic Gardnerian witch, an Ngangalero in Palo Mayombe, a Discordian pope, and a practicing Santero. He is also an award-winning illustrator and the author of the brand new book, Magical AI Grimoire, a book of shadows for contemporary chaos. Out now, anywhere you buy books. Spells and Magic for the modern era listeners, going to be a fascinating chat with my friend Dave Zilla. Again, that is taking place April 10th. We will be live 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, only on the Paranormal Girl Podcast Twitch and YouTube channels. Now, the Saturday prior. So coming up here real quick, April 5th, I will be live with my Beer, Booze, and Boogeymen co-hosts, Joey, Gil, and Damien, telling scary stories and accepting your calls. This time on B3, we are talking about haunted and paranormal games. Oh, the games we play. If you have played a paranormal game, whether it was Ouija, Bloody Mary, the Midnight Game, the Elevator Game, and something weird and spooky happened, give us a call. Also, in honor of April Fool's Day, we are accepting stories and calls of the best pranks that you have ever pulled. I know you guys got some good ones with that one. We are looking forward to hearing all of your stories. Catch it April 5th, 4:30 p.m. Pacific at the link in the show notes. Final announcement. I recently published a deep and thorough expose on the stone tape theory for the Society for Arcane Studies. This write-up includes a ton of information I just couldn't quite fit into our episode on it, so I do hope you make your way over to the Society's reports page to check it out, and please message me your thoughts after you finish. Would love to get your personal feelings on the matter and your feedback, of course, of my analysis. I'm really looking forward to continuing to write more for the Society, so would love to hear all of that. But that is it for announcements. Let's get into the third man factor. So, to start out today, we are going to very quickly talk about some famous and not so famous accounts of this phenomenon that specifically took place under extreme circumstances, so that we have a basic concept at the start here to help shape our understanding of the third man factor. Then we're going to branch off and explore some other possibilities. All of these accounts come from a paper written by Peter Sudfeld and John Geiger called The Sensed Presence as a Coping Resource in Extreme Environments. I have this entire paper linked in the notes today. Do check it out. For anyone new to this subject, John Geiger is also the author of the book, The Third Man Factor. So he was really the first to compile these kinds of stories all into one place and share them with the public. I don't know, really cool. So let's start with this one. One of the most famous survival stories and accounts of the third man ever recorded took place in 1916 at the tail end of a doomed Antarctic expedition. Deep in the Weddell Sea, just north of the Antarctic coast, after having navigated through ice for some time, Ernest Shackleton, his party, and his ship, the Endurance, found themselves now firmly frozen in an ice floe. It was January of 1915. The ship would drift northward with the ice for months, with Shackleton hoping it would be released from its grips in the spring and the warmer waters. Unfortunately, the pressure that had been applied to the ship from its constraints would crush the walls of the ship and allow water through. The men abandoned the ship for temporary camps on the ice on October 24th, and almost a month later watched as the Endurance slid permanently beneath the surface. Shackleton and Co. camped in place for months, riding the ice floe as it drifted along. They would pick up and move to another, hoping it would drift closer to a safe landing. While they would get very close to their best chance, Paulette Island, they found the 60 miles of chunky ice water between them and the shore to be impenetrable. 60 miles from help, and they couldn't get there. Can you imagine? On April 9th, their ice floe broke into two pieces. The men were forced to pile into lifeboats. After 5 days at sea, the party arrived at Elephant Island. It was land, but far off the beaten path of civilization or any shipping routes or hope of rescue. Shackleton made the risky decision to send a rescue vessel of sorts and bring back help. He, along with 5 other men, jumped into one of the lifeboats and set sail to their starting point of this entire journey, South Georgia, and 15 days later would miraculously land on its southern shores, also off the beaten path of civilization or hope of rescue. That was all located on the north side of South Georgia. These guys really couldn't win. So, leaving 3 men to sit tight with the boat, Shackleton teamed up with Frank Worsley and Tom Crean and set out on foot to travel the treacherous, dangerous, snow-covered mountainous terrain of the 32 miles of no man's land, separating them from the whaling stations and certain rescue. On May 20th, 1916, they would arrive in Stromness, send a boat for the 3 men on the other side of the island, and after a few more hiccups, because, why not toss them in there as well, would arrange to send a boat to travel back to Elephant Island in order to rescue the rest of their party. All men would survive. It was 20-something men. All of them would survive this awful journey, which is pretty damn miraculous in itself. But the most stunning occurrence would be revealed later when Shackleton would admit in his book to having felt an additional person had accompanied himself, Worsley, and Crean on the last leg of their journey. Even more stunning, both Worsley and Crean would independently agree to having experienced the same awareness of an extra companion, silently helping and guiding them on their journey. Shackleton would state, "I know that during that long and racking march of 36 hours over the unnamed mountains and glaciers of South Georgia, it seemed to me often that we were 4, not 3. An earlier experience with the third man occurred in 1895 during the first solo circumnavigation of the world attempted by Joshua Slocum. Joshua would say that he was joined by a sensed presence multiple times during his voyage, but the first time occurred early on. He had fallen ill from food poisoning and was lying on the floor of the cabin when suddenly a strange guest appeared. This strange guest said that he was there to aid him, saying, 'Lie quiet, and I will guide your ship tonight.' 48 hours later, when Slocum had recovered, he found his boat was on its correct course and heading for Gibraltar, thanks to the presence of a friend and a seaman of vast experience. He would become convinced that his mysterious friend was the pilot of the famous ship, the Pinta. Charles Lindbergh reported ghostly presences passing through the walls of his plane during his 33-and-a-half-hour-long solo transatlantic flight. He could not see them, but he could hear them. He said they kept him company and talked to him while offering navigational advice and reassurance. And one more that took place quite a bit more recently on 9/11. There were a couple of people who reported a third man experience during this tragedy. Ron DeFrancesco's story is a fairly well-known one, and it is absolutely astounding. But I wanted to share this one that is included in Sudfeld and Geiger's paper to just, offer just a different one from that day. New York Port Authority police officer Will Jimeno was buried in the rubble that was the concourse level after the first tower fell. Will suffered from dehydration and his injuries. Things were mighty bleak. But 10 hours into his ordeal, he suddenly felt a powerful presence nearby. When he looked up, he saw Jesus walking towards him with a bottle of water. And at that moment, he says he knew he was going to survive. And he would later be found and rescued from the rubble. So we see the similarities, but a range here in reports that are considered third man factor. As far as the presence itself, it can have a little flexibility. Some only feel it, some see it, some don't see it, but they hear it. Sometimes whatever or whoever it is physically, steers your ship. And sometimes it's a religious figure. That last one stood out to me for its similarity to the story told by the miners trapped in the rubble following the Shackleton mining disaster that took place in the 1960s. I spoke with one of the foremost writers about this case, Maxim Furyk, not too long ago. I will link that chat in today's notes for you to check out after this show. 3 miners were trapped in total, 2 separated from the third. On the 2 men's side, a lot of strange phenomena was taking place, which they would talk about following their rescue. Strange stuff like a blue light that illuminated things in the pitch dark. They were 300 feet below the surface for 2 weeks straight up. After their headlamps had burned out, light was an impossibility. And they said at times they could see strange beings sitting on marble staircases in another plane dimension, just, somewhere else. And then there was the Pope. Pope John the 23rd had died a couple of months prior, but suddenly appeared down in the mine. And they would report, just as Will Jimeno had, that with his appearance came the feeling that everything would be okay, that they would survive. What's really interesting about this third man sighting, though, only one of these men really knew who the Pope was. The other man was not religious. After they were rescued, they were in a hospital, I believe, and there was a picture of this particular Pope up on the wall. And the unreligious one points to it and he says, Davy, look, there's that man we saw down there. That detail gets lost in the mix, I think, when considering this third man encounter, or third man encounters, period. Sometimes there are features of these experiences that are really hard to explain. Like, how did this kid, he was 28 at the time, but whatever. How did he point this guy out that had been with them while buried when he didn't know who this was? Didn't previously know what he looked like. Dave Fellon knew, Davey did, but his fellow survivor did not. All right, so we have explored the basic concept of this phenomenon. Now, Sudfeld and Geiger's paper does specifically only explore cases that took place in extreme and unusual environments. They said that these in particular were of interest to psychologists, and though I think it leaves quite a bit on the table undiscussed, I get where they're coming from, and it does give them a baseline to work from. John Geiger, interestingly, did also write a book to cover some of those other kinds of third man cases that I will be talking about today, ones that are not necessarily happening under the severest of circumstances. So he obviously thinks something is important about these as well, but he calls it something else. The book is called The Angel Effect, which I thought was a really interesting choice for a title. Back to the paper. Based on the extreme and unusual cases, they were able to propose 4 indisputable facts about these experiences that can be seen in most cases. And these 4 facts include: they occur to otherwise mentally normal, physically healthy individuals, many of them adventurous and of outstanding achievement. 2, they occur in stressful situations, prominently including environments of very low temperature and impoverished stimulus input. 3, in almost every case, they serve as a coping resource in that they aid the individual's efforts to survive. And 4, despite a proliferation of theoretical explanations, the critical studies that would enable us to choose among these remain to be conducted. So, before we move on, let's talk about some of these theoretical explanations that have been proposed. Psychosis, or condition-created hallucinations; trauma or post-traumatic stress causing a sensed presence; the brain grappling with either too much stimuli or too little stimuli, therefore creating an equalizer or agent for a more normal brain state; hypnagogic or hypnopompic type states of awareness. All of these have their place in explaining certain third man encounters, of course. Our brains are weird, and they do weird things, especially under stress. But they can't account for all, or even most cases, for a variety of reasons. In most cases, no one was schizophrenic or exhibited symptoms of psychosis. Most were wide awake and consciously doing something, therefore could not have experienced hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations. PTSD, sure, but while it can be argued these scenarios are indeed highly stressful to traumatic, why doesn't everyone in the same situation, or just more people in the same situation, experience a sensed presence, or see visuals of people, or hear these helpful voices, if being under this level of stress causes these things? One more theory, though, that does seem to be kind of plausible, though it is extreme and would completely change the way that we think about consciousness and evolution. These images, sounds, or sensed presences could be a byproduct of bicameral mentality, which is a hypothesis proposed by Julian Jaynes. Based on his research, he made the case that the bicameral mind was the normal form of consciousness for ancient humans. Supposedly, it was a very separated way of thinking between the 2 brain hemispheres, where some of these thoughts seem to be coming from an external source, as opposed to the I, me, or self-aware way of thinking that we have today, where all of our thoughts kind of work together and we are aware that all of our thoughts are coming from us. This could be what explains why so many humans of old had visions of holy figures and angels, or heard the voice of God. Because of this separation, it basically seemed like the thoughts were coming from something other than their own minds. It's a debatable theory, but certainly something to consider. If it is true, this bicameral mentality is old human brain wiring. Could people in certain situations, under intense stress, in the middle of life or death crises, be plugging back in momentarily to that old program? We still sometimes utilize primal fear and primal instinct. Could we also be utilizing primal thinking, when it's a matter of life or death. I'm open to it, but there are stories that make me a little doubtful. And this is where the third man cases that Geiger and Sudfeld decided not to include come into play. Cases that fall outside the lines of convenience in explaining this phenomenon in a scientific and structured way. Cases that belong more so in Geiger's angel effect book rather than the third man factor, even though they are pretty similar, but we might call it by another name. Ghosts, deceased loved ones, spirit guides, angels. This next story is very similar to the one that I heard years ago, but it's got an interesting addendum to it that's a little unexpected. It comes from Brad Steiger's book, Angel Miracles, Inspirational True Stories of Heavenly Help. So in 1998, this man named Nicholas was plowed into by a speeding car, and he was incredibly hurt, very disoriented, very confused. Suddenly, there's this beautiful, smiling woman there next to him in the front seat. She's reassuring him everything was going to be all right. And he says that she told him that his life was about to change, but that he was up to it. And he described her as pretty, brunette, and her eyes had this golden hue when the sunlight hit them. So when emergency vehicles arrived, she got out of the way, or so he thought, so that they could help him. And it hadn't occurred to him earlier how this girl had been sitting where she was sitting until the firemen applied the jaws of life to his crushed, crumpled up tin can of a vehicle in order to get to him. There had been no way a person could have just entered the car and sat down. So Nicholas would not see this woman again. That goes without saying. He would survive the crash, though he would be without the use of his legs and confined to a wheelchair moving forward. So yeah, pretty big change in life right there. So 5 years later, Nicholas was on an outing with another wheelchair-bound friend of his named Jake. And this was something the two did often. They decided to go down this old black-topped country road, and wanting just a peaceful time out of it in the quiet countryside, both opted to leave their phones behind. The road turned out to be pretty treacherous and unkempt, and since Nicholas had a motorized chair while his friend had a manual one and had grown really tired trying to avoid, the bumps and the holes and whatnot, Nicholas hooked him up and was towing him behind him. And then they just continued down this road. And they're going along, staring at all the pretty surroundings, not really paying attention, and noticed too late a really big pothole. Nicholas missed it, but Jake behind him did not. Tipped into it, ended up on the ground with his heavy chair on top of him. Nicholas says his friend was over 200 pounds, and he couldn't do much to help him up or even get the chair up or off of him. They left their phones behind, so they couldn't call for help. And they hadn't seen anybody in the entire time that they'd been on this deserted road. So they were kind of in a dire situation until hopefully someone random just came down the road. Well, as luck would have it, about 20 minutes later, they would see this old car rolling down in their direction. Hoping it was someone who would be able to lift the chair and then Jake to put him back into it, their hopes were dashed when the car stopped and a petite brunette woman stepped out. Without a word, she walks over to him, pulls the chair out of the pothole before grabbing Jake by the belt and effortlessly placing him into it. Nicholas says that just before she returned to her car, she looked directly at him. She smiled a very familiar smile, and from the light of the sun, her pupils glowed a golden hue. Nicholas would believe this woman to be his guardian angel. He says she got back in her car and disappeared quickly. Too quickly. His first story, without a doubt, I would call that a third man encounter. offered him reassurance and comfort in his moment of need, was in his car somehow when that was later realized to be an impossibility, disappeared as soon as help arrived. But then we have this second appearance by the same figure, and they both saw her. Similar to Shackleton's story, she physically intervened. Similar to Slocum's story. Could this have been a different but similar looking Good Samaritan? Possible. But if everything happened the way Nicholas remembered it happening, and if this woman was the same figure, could his story be saying something important about the third man encounter that we are overlooking? Is it making it harder to realize this is actually a third man encounter because it is in a book about angels and he believes it to be his guardian angel? Are we not looking at the grand picture and a possibly much, much bigger phenomenon than we've previously thought? Last pondering question, is his story and stories like his, and there are countless, do they point to something paranormal rather than neurological or psychological? Are we talking about some entity here? Despite the given paranormal boxes that we might put these entities into. Not all cases. I don't think that. Just from what I've read on the subject, it does seem highly likely, just like in the case that I made for shadow people, that there is a psychological source for some of these experiences. It's been shown in labs and lab settings and studies that if certain parts of your brain are activated by different frequencies and, electrical currents and stuff like that, there can be a sensed presence manufactured artificially. And then it's been shown once that activation is cut off, the sensed presence goes away. It's interesting because it shows the mind can manufacture these events to an extent. But these manufactured presences in the labs are not done under the same scenarios found in most third man encounters. They are not necessarily benevolent. They don't direct or offer guidance. So they are missing the mark a little bit. And again, there are some trippy stories that are pointing to the cause of some of these experiences to be something outside of ourselves. And some which are evidence of that due to information received by the experiencer who could not have previously known it. And a good example of this is one of Edith Foltz Stern's experiences that is documented in Geiger's book, The Third Man Factor. Now, Edith was kind of a badass. She was the first female transport pilot in the U.S., first female transport pilot in the U.S., and she worked as a transport pilot during World War II. Now, during that time, she was flying a craft to an Air Force base in Scotland. It was during the day, but there was poor visibility due to the fog cover. And as she approached her destination, she became turned around in the fog, and she would circle and descend over and over, trying to find her landing. And she'd been at this for a while, and night was fast approaching, which likely would have made the landing impossible in the fog. On yet another of her searching but blind descents, suddenly a voice snapped at her, "Edie, look out." It was her father's voice. Her father had recently passed away. As soon as she heard it, without missing a beat, she pulled the plane up and narrowly avoided the hill hidden in the fog right in front of her. Many third man encounter stories are amazing all by themselves, even if they are nothing but a comforting and guiding presence on which someone's survival literally depended. But when I see one where the survival of that person depended on the presence intervening based on information not known to the person, sticks out. It's evidential. Now, prior to this flight, Edith had experienced another presence while in the air. In 1932, she had gotten lost and she was running low on fuel. She began searching for literally anywhere that she could make an emergency landing, and she spotted some railroad tracks. She knew it would be risky, but wasn't really, any other option that she could see, as far as she knew. As she began her descent, she heard a voice, loud and clear, yelling, "No, Edie, don't do it." This startled her, and she pulled up and continued on. Edith said she recognized the voice as belonging to an old classmate of hers who had died. Now, within minutes of having done this maneuver, she would spot a runway where she landed safely. So, also a very cool story. We don't know if the voice knew there would be a runway, if she just kept going, or if she just didn't want her trying to land on those particular tracks. Either way, it probably saved her life. Additional evidence that points to some intelligence outside of ourselves having a hand in this phenomenon. There have been stories told where the presence was felt over a good portion of the journey and then completely evaporated. These people saying that they suddenly felt so alone minutes before they were rescued. If it's purely a mentally created phenomenon, how did these people know their rescue was imminent and they could safely exit their primal survival third man mode before rescue happened or there was any indication it was about to? I don't know. All right, so we are going to wrap it up shortly here. But since we are talking about a paranormal possibility, and because I always seem to have to include something really weird and unnecessary, but it's just what my brain do. I want to toss out another possibility just for consideration. It's fun. It's all theory, whatever. So we have talked about the third man as a scientific potential. I told a story about someone who thought theirs was a guardian angel. Edith's story seems to be indicating a ghostly factor. Some have proposed it could be a spirit guide. Some have proposed it could be some form of our higher self. But what if it's none of these things, but rather an entity we already know from history and myth and folklore? There are some similarities with a few. So these beings are generally the more benevolent of their species, known to help humans that they favor. They are nomadic spirits, shapeshifters, and can make themselves invisible to humans at will. They are more likely to engage with humans in a friendly manner, offering guidance or companionship to travelers. Interpretations can vary across different cultures and texts, some including these beings' downside and non-similar traits and behaviors that do include the capacity for leading people astray if angered and, in general, being tricksters. I am speaking of a type of jinn called the Jan. Could be a possibility. In Japanese folklore, there is a creature called the Tengu. There are two types, the Karasu and the Yamabushi Tengu. The Karasu is described as having bird-like features and is often associated with mischief and cunning. In opposition, however, the Yamabushi Tengu is depicted in human form and symbolizes spiritual knowledge and connection to nature. Tengu are regarded as the guardians of the mountains and forests and are known to guide lost travelers, often leading them safely through treacherous mountain paths. Though folklore does point to a trickster element with these entities, their interactions with lost humans reinforce the idea that they are also benevolent spirits. And after guiding an individual through the dense forest or dangerous mountain path, ensuring their safety, when the traveler turns to thank them, the Tengu may have already vanished. In addition to these, there are numerous spirits and entities who show benevolence to humans, though their main focus may be on pieces of land or mountains or trees, bodies of water. The Agathos daimon of Greek mythology was mostly concerned with households and the surrounding land, though some texts do speak of it as a sort of individual's guide and protector. There aren't many, but we can see examples of good fairies interacting and helping people in need. Also, from Norse mythology, we can see an assortment of spirits called the Vatir, with different variations to their names signifying their particular areas of protection, but also will show kindness and guidance to humans who travel into their areas. So, there you go. There's your, that's a weird thought for today. But you know what? Maybe not so weird. Maybe not, in a way, because all of this thinking about various benevolent spirits in mythology and some of their similarities to the third man experience got me thinking about archetypes. And archetypes got me thinking about DMT. The spirit molecule, yes, and the beings that are often reported by the collective of users. Many DMT experiencers do report similar entities while on their trip. The jester or clown is a big one. There's a mother figure, machine elves. That one Terrence McKenna was reporting back in the 60s. Alien reptoid type characters. There's some weird ones. It has been debated what these entities could possibly be or mean. Is it likely, because they seem archetypal, this is a shared experience among so many because our brains are hardwired for it? Or is it more like most DMT experiencers will tell you, no, this was a vastly deep spiritual experience. This was an ego death and a viewing of an entirely other level of reality. This stuff is real. It's there. It's always there. And now I can just see it. DMT gives me the ability to access it. I find the studies and work that has been done with DMT really fascinating. While it is a drug that you can ingest, it is also something that is naturally contained in our bodies. Many in the scientific community point to it and other chemicals as the cause of audio and visual aspects of NDEs, near-death experiences. When we die, our brains release a surge of neurotransmitters. Dr. Rick Strassman, who has worked with DMT for a very long time, proposed DMT being one of them, excreted by the pineal gland and thus contributing to what we experience as we die. This is just his proposal, and there's not yet enough evidence that it is true. But if it were, based on Strassman's theory, I wondered if perhaps that is what might be happening during third man syndrome experiences. Are these the visions, auditory hallucinations that feel and seem so real at the time? Simply the creation of DMT being released in an oftentimes dying or traumatized brain? Could that be the answer? And that was like a punch to the gut. Takes all of the magic out of it. Until I dug a little deeper, thought a little longer about it, and realized, oh, actually, that would be a great explanation if it were true. We currently have more than enough NDE accounts that contain veridical evidence. I cannot get into it now. This episode would be 5 hours long because it's absolutely fascinating and awe-inspiring, and I deeply, deeply love the subject. It is my jam. But in short, people on the brink of death or have officially died come back reporting things that they cannot know because they were unconscious or, dead. So if DMT was the reason they were able to know these things, allowed them to see and hear it, great. Combine this with DMT users who claim their experiences were spiritual, were real, were events taking place at a deeper level of consciousness in another realm, another reality, the real reality that is taking place at all times, all around us, but us non-DMT users, non-currently dying people in normal brain states cannot see it all the time. We're just chilling here in our physical reality, thinking this is it. Hell, Dan Go Thoughts on YouTube has been talking about DMT for a while, and he has actually proposed an incredible experiment that will prove the reality of what we are seeing while on DMT. This is his claim. That it is literally showing us the real reality that is creating our simulation. Fascinating stuff. I will link his channel. More evidence that what is happening on DMT is real is that multiple people have reported sharing the same experiences and seeing the same things, features, beings together at the same time while tripping. I will link a Reddit thread for that if that piques your curiosity. It sure piqued mine. So, if DMT opens a deeper part of our consciousness, allows us to peek into another reality, the one behind this reality, and it is showing us beings that are beyond our everyday comprehension, are very real, and people under high stress in unusual environments or situations with brains that are doing funky things and surging DMT, maybe what they are experiencing, their helpful companions and guides, are in fact real. Another twist on the simulation aspect. I'm not done. Another twist that I found kind of profound. A channel I catch every now and then on TikTok called Alive and Kicking decided to pop up randomly on my FYP one day. His video on the third man syndrome and what it could be. He shared this theory that physicist and consciousness researcher Tom Campbell proposed, that these benevolent and helpful beings that we experience during our crisis are actually kind of like NPC temporary characters inserted into the simulation by the simulation creator as course correctors. If you were not supposed to die on that mountain peak, if that car accident wasn't supposed to happen that way and you are in trouble, whatever the situation, insert NPC, steer the path of the person back in the correct direction, disappear. I don't know. I thought that was really interesting and connected to what I'm talking about. So, wanted to share. So, are we in a simulation? Bet you didn't see that coming in all of this. Are we in the presence of our guardian angels? Is it us? Is the third man a ghost? A lot to consider today. But no matter the explanation behind the phenomenon, it shouldn't be lost on us an undeniable truth about it. There is some mechanism at play ensuring that some of us, in our darkest moments and latest hours, experience the presence of another who is right there with us, giving us the only thing we need to keep going and the strongest antidote to defeat on the face of our planet: hope and the will to carry on. And where there is a will, there's a way. That is going to wrap today's look into the third man factor. This topic was a lot of fun to get into and a complete turnabout for me. It took me in some directions that I was not expecting, but that did not change my interest in it. Far from it. I am more intrigued than ever. I do believe that this phenomenon is quite a bit larger than we've previously thought because it's been separated. So instead of considering the third man as its own little corner of the weird and unusual, I now consider it an umbrella term for many, many similar experiences that are sharing similar features. And I would love to hear from you if you have had this experience. Have you felt a presence, heard a voice, felt a physical touch in your time of need? Were you saved during a tragedy or prior to one, thus preventing it altogether? Did something or someone intervene, give you hope, course correct, that you still wonder what or who that could have been? Send in your story. Tell me what you personally think it was. And if you don't know, that's okay too. I still really would love to hear it. Message the show at paranormalgirlpod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this show on YouTube, do me a favor and like the video and subscribe to the channel before you go. If you enjoyed it on a listening platform, leaving a rating really does help the show seem like a safer bet to check out to new listeners. And if you would like to be my third man today, help the show not just survive, but thrive, share the link where you watched or listened with a friend. Now, rather than any more calls to action today, I would like to share some gratitude here at the end. First, I want to give a very special thank you to all of my patrons who honor me so by supporting all of the stuff happening in the back rooms of this here PGP simulation. Paranormal Girl has recently turned 4 years old. Oh, man. I missed my own anniversary, you guys, but I had intended, looking up towards it, knowing it was coming down the road, I had intended to do a group thank you to patrons for their support of the program and helping me to even get this far. You guys just, you mean the world to me. So thank you guys so much. And a special thank you goes out today to a listener of the program, Miss Linda. Your message checking in when I was just wrapping up my break really hit me in the feels. I just wasn't expecting it. And it meant a lot to hear from you. I am so glad that you enjoy the content and so glad to know that I've got, awesome people like you out there who are listening. So thank you so much, my dear. And thank you again to patrons. All right. That's it for now. Really hope to see some of you this Saturday on Beer, Booze, and Boogeymen, or on the 10th for my next live guest interview with Dave Zilla. Otherwise, I will be back with my next deep dive in 2 weeks. But until we meet again, stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.